Jeff Lynn. I'm CEO and co-founder of Seedrs. I am so sorry not to be able to be with you. As many of you know, entrepreneurs yourself, schedules become very, very random and uncontrollable. I've suddenly had to Hong Kong for a few days. But you're going to be in fantastic hands with our COO, Jeff Kelisky. Jeff just joined the business a few months ago and has had a fantastically long career I have. So you're going to have a chance to hear from him about his experience and his journey, as well as about what we do at Seedrs. But I wanted to take this opportunity first to say thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your interest in what we're doing. And also to say and to invite all of you who are building businesses and who are looking at different sources of capital to come give us a shout if you're ever interested in learning more about Seedrs and more about crowdfunding. One of the things we've seen in the 4.5, nearly 5 years that we've been live is that crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, what we do, can serve businesses at all different ranges and all different sectors. We've had everything from very, very small tech-led businesses to much larger consumer products and retail businesses and everything in between. One of the things we find very often is the businesses come to us for two reasons. One is because of the capital. There are a huge number of investors out there who use platforms like ours in order to get access to businesses like yours. Early stage companies are a very exciting asset class, and there are a lot of people who want the access but don't know how to have it. We provide the platform for them. But it can also be about community. The value that our businesses get from having 300, 500, 1,000 of their crowd, of their community, of their customers invested in the business, owning a stake, and being aligned with your success can be massive. Now, there's a whole lot of work that goes into it, and that's what we do, and I think Jeff Kelisky will tell you more about how we work and what we do to make sure we get all the benefits of the crowd without some of the potential detriments. But I would encourage you, no matter where you are in your entrepreneurial journey, to give it a thought. We're working very hard to build the most effective, efficient, and transparent form of finance for early stage businesses. The final thing I would say is just to give you two tips as you think about equity crowdfunding and think about how you might want to go about financing the business. One is that networks are hugely valuable. One of the things that we've tried to do with Seedrs is make it so that it wasn't just people from rich families who raised early stage capital. And believe it or not, it may seem strange today, but 10 years ago, that's how it often was. Entrepreneurs in London who were raising their first bit of capital tended to get it from a rich uncle. We think that's wrong. We don't think that's a sensible way of funding businesses. But that doesn't mean that who you know and who you develop relationships with is irrelevant. And if you're able to go out there and show 100, 200, 300 of your friends, colleagues, and other people in your network like you're doing, believe in you, and are willing to put in a few £100 to support you, that goes a huge way to showing larger and less connected investors that, hey, there's something to this business. So we're very, very big fans of the power of networks. We've used our own networks to finance Seedrs and to build our routes through the years, and we think it can be a very, very useful way of looking at crowdfunding. The second thing to say is we're there for businesses in all stages, and we like businesses that are at their very, very early stage raising their first capital just as much as we do much later ones. But you don't want to do what we can in capital. The common advice. But the point is that while genuine bootstrapping, while slugging in year in, year out, is counterproductive. You just delete by your competition. At the same time, you want to be able to have as much to show investors as you can. And doing what you can with leveraging the resources around you to build as much as you can, whether that's the way of product, whether that's the way of the social media following, or whatever it may be. It's huge rewards when you come onto a platform like Seedrs to raise money. So those are my two tips. Think about network, do what you can with that money. And now I will say good evening. Have a wonderful time. I know that you will be fantastically entertained and educated by my great colleague, Jeff Kelisky, and thank you so much.
So now we know why Jeff is not going to join us. He joined us this way, but we have something else for you, like we heard. We have another Jeff who is at least as cool as Jeff Lynn. So without any further ado, please get on and give a warm welcome to Jeff Kelisky. Jeff, let's jump right in. Let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey until now. You learned the entrepreneur.
Nothing upstaged by your boss on video. My Multimap, I guess, was the very first credible play, which back when it used paper-based maps, which kind of seems an odd thing now. It was that transition to digital and taking a business from 6 people in a windowless office in Covent Garden to about 120 around the world, and then successfully selling it was a complete anathema to me when I started my journey. And in many ways, as I think of entrepreneurship, a lot of people say, oh, so what does it take? Like what background do you need? What experiences do you need? You know what? Everybody's different. I mean, mine was, not at all what you'd expect. It was very much a corporate, IBM. Although I was the nerd who'd stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning coding, I was a sort of corporate animal. And it wasn't until after my business school, and I did a stint in A.T. Kearney, which was management consulting and all of the normal corporate baggage that comes with that, the long hours, the crazy PowerPoint you'd have to get. When do you get a real job? And because he was into the small business and he led. And because he was into the small business and he led the entrepreneurship program at London Business School. And it was really that kind of kicked off my, I guess, all right, point in terms of, some of the things that he and I have been talking about. And that's really what, I guess, prompted my jump, along with the fact that the internet boom was taking off and everybody was going to become billionaires overnight back in 1999, 2000. So I joined entrepreneurship 9 months before the bubble burst, which was an interesting time.
That's a very good timing. Now, how many of you, raise your hand if you know the brand Multimap, if you heard about it? Apparently, Multimap was, in 2002, the most popular British brand online.
Yes, the #1 online brand behind the BC. So in terms of consumers, whilst there were some bigger brands, obviously, with Yahoo at the time, that sort of thing. But in terms of a British online brand, we were just behind the BBC.
And you were the employee number 6, so you were very early. You saw the company grow, and until you got bought by Microsoft.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it was not a straight line. So from 6 people to 120, we had a lot of existential threats, and we almost didn't survive several times. I think our bank balance dropped, and when we had 30 employees. It's not something I'd recommend, but the reality is that it's through those things that actually the culture and the will to survive and the will to win gets born, and it's probably one of the things that I took most away, which was actually anything's possible. You just need to not ever give up if you believe in what you're doing.
Very true. And then you decided to join Microsoft and stay with the Bing local search team. And you told me that you also work with the current CEO of Microsoft. Is it true?
Yeah, it was it was kind of unusual journey. So we were acquired by Microsoft, and to go head to head with Google in search and mapping, and Multimap was going to be the beachhead into Europe for them. And so I was asked to lead the mapping division, and for a brief period, as the organization grew, obviously his remit got larger, and I fundamentally took on the mapping piece as live search became Bing.
And after this while Microsoft, you joined Picsolve.
Yeah, so I was at Microsoft for 3 years as part of the search team. And so kind of one of the interesting things about being in search is you see everything that's happening online because you're looking at query logs. So we could kind of see all of Google's query logs, we could see all of Bing's query logs. So you kind of knew what was hot, what was in demand. The two biggest online trends then were mobile and social. You could argue that hasn't really changed. And the biggest thing in social was image and video. And Picsolve was a British company based in Derby that took photography in the leisure industry, captured about 100 million images a year. Now in 2010, no theme park, no leisure industry photos were online. So you had sort of 1.5 billion images a year in an industry being taken, none of which were online, at a time when the hottest thing was image and video. So from my perspective, it was, that's not going to stay the same very long. You know, step in and try and actually be one of those companies that drives a transformation. So it was taking a business, we had to actually do a turnaround first. So it was a bit struggling at the time. So we turned it around, and then we drove a digital platform and launched that into the leisure industry. And it was a global business. So actually we launched it in the US, in Europe, in the UK. And that was, again, completely changing an economic model and a user experience from print to mobile.
Was it hard to turn a business which is not very digital into a digital business?
It was very hard. It was, I don't know that I would go through the same turnaround experience again. I think everybody, certainly every entrepreneur, will go through 24-hour days, and but it was a real challenge because it was an existing business, so we had over 100 customers around the world, capturing 100 images a year, which means you've got hardware and that complexity, and you have to change an economic model and a guest experience whilst you change the fundamentals of the business at a time when you're cash strapped. So I guess my analogy was we have to change the engine on this plane while we're in flight. We did it. I don't know that I'd want to do it again. That could be somebody else's job. But I learned a lot, and it was, and in many ways, looking back at the experiences I had, it was fantastic. The learning was phenomenal, and the people I worked with was great.
It's a good experience. Now, before we jump into Seedrs, I would like to tell you, our dear audience, we want to hear your voice. All you need to do is just open your browser in your mobile, just type in slido.com, and the hashtag for today is SG Europe, as you see behind me. Feel free to ask what you want to know, and if you want, you can vote for questions you like. So I want to promise to you that we will answer the top 5 questions you will ask. So let us know what you want to know. If we don't cover it, we definitely will take some questions at the end from Slido and during the talk. So feel free to ask. Now, fast forward to Seedrs. How did you meet Jeff Lynne?
So I was introduced to Jeff in the summer of last year through a pretty standard headhunting process. So there was some, I don't have any fantastic serendipitous experience, but when we met, we got along immediately. I think part of it wasn't the fact that we shared the same name, but it was more, I suppose, some of our experiences and our approach to business.
Looking at your experience, I see that you join a company, you become a CEO. You join another company, you become a CEO. Is it a pattern which we can see here?
I think the pattern for me is more a case of I love to be involved in a business where you can see that you can make an impact in the world, and that impact is not it's not a niche impact. Actually, it can have a global impact. You can change either the behavior of people because they suddenly like what's being done. It's more useful, and I really enjoy working with passionate people, with founders who I get along with. And so for me, it's less about the position. I think with Sean Phelan, the founder of Multimap, you know, it suited him for me to take on a lot of the operational stuff, which he really didn't want to do. In terms of where I am now, I think I just love being in the company in terms of what there is, and I don't think I would have done it if I didn't believe in Jeff Lynne.
Can you tell us, just for us to understand better the business, some numbers about Seedrs? So you had over 200 million invested through the platform in your companies?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So in many ways, I mean, with a lot of people that I've met recently since I've known the business, and you talk about equity crowdfunding, they're like, oh, what's that? I mean, I know that Obama raised a lot of money through crowdfunding. What's this thing? But actually, Seedrs has raised, it's launched, million. About 470 some odd campaigns have made it through the platform in that time. We were the first, I guess, actually in the beginning, Jeff Lynne was very closely working with Number 10 and a lot of policy settings. So first regulated equity crowdfunding platform. There's probably, I think the average number of investments for half of our investors is about 9. So you've got, you know, a fairly active investor base who make multiple investments of roughly an average of $2,000. And I think one of the most interesting things that happened recently is because we've been around since 2012 and we have all the data, we looked at all of the crowdfunding campaigns that happened in the last 3 years. And actually looking at the value growth of those businesses, it's been about a 14% IRR on that growth. And even more interesting is the fact that for those investors who made 20 investments, then actually those was even higher. So if you look at equity crowdfunding as an investor, as a portfolio, actually you did better, which is exactly what we want. You know, it's playing in an asset class, which is very exciting.
Show of hands, how many of you have invested in a company which is on Seedrs? Okay, we have a few. And any other crowdfunding platform you invested in? Not Seedrs? So we have some audience. How many of you are thinking or are currently on Seedrs as a company which is looking for investment? Okay, a handful. Okay, so there's loads of crowdfunding platforms in the market. And there's a question here on Slido: how do you differentiate Seedrs from other?
There's a few different things, and I suppose you'll get the non-lawyer answer since Jeff's not here. But I think there's probably 2 key dimensions that I'd talk to. One is the fact that in this domain, we very much view it as a whole life relationship. From the point that an entrepreneur seeks funding, goes onto the platform, succeeds at closing that round, and then it's maintaining that relationship afterwards. So the whole journey, end to end, the follow-on round, other activity, because of the nature of how we do what we do and the alumni club afterwards, we kind of maintain that end-to-end relationship and help out afterwards when needed, give access to professional services or other things afterwards. But one of the other things that is quite unique, because of Jeff's legal background and then some of the things, some of the constructs that exist in terms of how the share agreements are formed, which is quite important, actually have been done in a way to look after both the investor and the entrepreneur's interests beyond. Because, you know, although as an asset class, it's a risky asset class, everybody, actually, how many entrepreneurs are there in the room? Right, good number. So everybody's going into this to succeed, right? So everybody, you know, the round that you do is probably the beginning of a journey or part of an ongoing journey. So you may be back, or you may have reached profitability afterwards. But our view is, you know, that relationship needs to continue, and therefore, all of the foundational elements from a financing perspective need to be sound, you know. And so that's what I think a lot of the work that's gone into what we've done exists and is quite different from the rest of the industry. So
Seedrs is a platform which is universal. So any startup can come and do a campaign, or you just recommend certain types of platform?
I think any startup business, I think Jeff's vision very much was this was very startup, you know, who were kind of really talking to angels. What's actually happened is it's become more market-based. So we have people raising 5 million. Especially the dealing with Series A's and in some cases Series B's, and in some cases, venture capitalists who are, funding part of a round and then looking for the crowd and the benefits of that crowd for their business. So it's actually quite broad, and there's many. But yes, it can apply to any. And in fact, I think one of the interesting things is, unfortunately, isn't this more to B2C business? This is much more consumer, because if a lot of the investors are consumers, it's something they'll recognize. It'll be, food and drink or something I might see in a retailer. But actually, one of the great things is looking at the data. It's not. We have just as much success. In fact, we have a bit more success in terms of the B2B side than in the B2C. So, there's Free Agent, which is an accounting software, not consumer, launched almost entirely funded through the crowd rather than bringing their own investors. And not only did they launch and successfully raise 1.5 million-ish, but they've now IPO'd. And so those people who came in with the crowd have now benefited from that IPO. So it's pretty broad. Mm-hmm.
How is it on the investor side? Do you have any special experts, any kinds of jobs they have which is common for them? Or how much value can a company which does a campaign expect from investors on Seedrs into their smart money kind of advice for the company?
That's a good question. I think we're probably at the beginning of our journey in that. I think there's broadly 3 benefits that you get in a crowdfunding campaign, other than the cash itself. There's a piece around validation. Look, I mean, if the crowd is going to follow you, then that's definitely saying something about their belief in what you've got to say. There's a piece around community, and that community is something which, for example, a lot of our businesses use. So there's a company, Oppo Ice Cream, which is a health-based ice cream, and actually they use their investors to go and make sure that their product is put correctly on the shelves of the retailers. So actually they'll send a note out to their investors and say, can you just make sure that where we're located, that actually our ice cream is facing the right way so people can see it, and then they'll send photos back to show where they are. We've had some, actually we've had some campaigns with the entrepreneurs who've hired their investors. I think one investor became the chief marketing officer.
Interesting.
Some have become advisors. So that relationship has gone beyond just the investor. But I think the point you make actually is just the beginning. I think there's a lot more that we can do, because a lot of our investors actually are passionate about a domain. They have a passion around a particular category. And so, and therefore that passion turns into knowledge. And it's really about leveraging that knowledge and that passion, which is something that entrepreneurs are at the beginning of tapping into.
Mm-hmm. What is the normal process of how much work is required from a startup before they start a campaign? What do you recommend for them to do in terms of putting together a nice video, having a nice description? How much work does it mean for the company?
It is quite a lot of work. I mean, look, raising funding for anybody. How many people have raised funds in this room? Right. It's hard, right? Like it's a lot of hours. It's pitching, it's pitch decks, it's conversations, it's hearing the answer no. It's no because of some random reason that doesn't make sense to you. Like regardless of whether it's crowdfunding or not, it's going to be difficult. We've got a team that kind of helps you through that journey, but you do need to dedicate the ones who are really successful, the campaigns and the teams that are successful at launching are those that put that time in, both in terms of their networks and working those networks and getting that engagement, because there isn't anybody who is going to tell your story better than you. Like, there shouldn't be anybody who can tell that story better than you. I mean, you might have a great salesman, but they're on your team. And it's very difficult for that to be done by other people. So that needs to come across in the video you do and in your conversations with those networks. So that's super critical. Who started a campaign. His wife was going to give birth in 2 days, and that didn't work. So he had his kid. That worked out fine. We put the whole campaign on hold, and then we came back online. So it isn't, it is something that you need to put your time into and dedicate. But there is one of the key roles of our investment team is you have a sort of named advisor, and they chaperone you through that process.
Yeah. Let's talk about common mistakes companies do when they start crowdfunding. I'm sure you've had a few which they have big expectations, nothing happens. What would you say are the most common mistakes they do when they come on the platform?
I think the things that I mentioned in terms of not necessarily understanding the need of their network. I mean, in a very blunt way, if your friends or family aren't backing you, it's going to be difficult to persuade other people to back you if you're really starting from nothing. So it's people who, I suppose, come with some of that expectation that it's just a source of funds, and actually it can be a lot more than that. You need to put that work in. I think the other thing is to leave enough time to do it. A lot of people say, oh yeah, I can get the video done in 2 weeks, it'll be fine, and look, it takes time. You need to edit something, and you need a couple of revisions, and you will need to leave probably a good month to get you through the process end to end with a quality product. If you remember, you'll have hundreds of thousands of people looking at what you've produced. That's one production that you're putting together, so it does need to be good.
There's a good question here on Slido from Andy, and he asks, is there a market standard formula for how Seedrs expects entrepreneurs to value their business in raising equity on your platform? So what's the formula for how much is my company worth?
I love that question because it's so hard. The area of investing has been around a long time. Angels, angel investing, VC investing. So there are some norms around, expectations, particularly if you're pre-revenue. Obviously, if you're pre-revenue, it's sort of a bit difficult. If you're post-revenue, then what is that saying about where you are? So our team will be, we tend to land into one of three categories. Either someone's come to the table and there is already a number, and they have a number. Why? Because they've already got an investor or some investors that are interested and have kind of set a marker down. There's another situation where they will come to the table and they'll have a point of view because they've got a strong belief in who they are and what they've seen, or they've looked at a company in their publications. Yeah. And then you've got the last category where they come and it's a blank sheet of paper, and they say, what should I value? What should I publish at? And then it's a discussion with our team in terms of looking at other crowdfunding campaigns and what's reasonable, because fundamentally, what you don't want to do is you don't want to go through the effort and then not hit your target. In our model, you define your target, and then you've got a certain amount of time to hit that number, and if you don't hit, then it's over. You can do it again, but it's just a lot harder to do second time.
In your experience, are the companies mostly modest about the valuation, or they are more greedy about overvaluing the company?
I think it is a mix. However, you usually end up at something that's pretty reasonable, because usually you get multiple investor voices playing a part in that discussion. I would say the occurrences of greedy, when you look at a company, you say, wow, where does that value come from? It happened, but it's definitely on the more rare side. I think and particularly as this whole market evolves. If I think about some of the campaigns that you may have seen a couple of years ago, it was probably a few unique experiences around a number looking more inflated. The more the industry evolves, the more transparent it becomes with this sort of liquidity. Actually, the more norms appear, the more people get used to it, and they understand, what does this mean to make an investment in this class? So actually, it's sort of heading very much toward what you expect in a transparent market.
Let's discuss a little bit the community, because this is something which Seedrs is good at. But if I have a startup, I'm thinking about crowdfunding, it's really hard to build a community from scratch. And Seedrs has done it twice. Because you're a marketplace, you obviously had to build a community of investors as well as community of companies which were using the platform. How did, in your opinion or in your experience, Seedrs did that in both sides?
So it's interesting because when you know, in some ways you can think about some of these businesses in two ways. You've got businesses that have one market, no matter how complex that may be, and then you've got some that have two-sided markets, which is obviously what we are. We've got buyers and sellers, investors and entrepreneurs. So it's harder because what you're trying to do is build both of them up at the same time. You need to bring a business to be funded. And so the beginning of Seedrs' life was very much bootstrapped, like many entrepreneurs in their sector, which is, you know, the founders hustle with their network of angels and other investors and high net worth people that they know to come onto the platform. And then they hustle to find deals to put on the platform and get funded. And it starts off with just a few very small, but I suppose pioneering customers where, you know, the deal will be 20,000, 30,000. You know, this is where it all began. It begins small. And each win gives the next group confidence to come on board. And that's how 2012, you have 20,000 deals, and we're sitting here in 2016, and you have, you know, £5 million deals. There isn't a fast track to it. It's hard graft and chasing it down.
Are there any shortcuts in terms of building your community? You mentioned already, if your friends and family don't fund you, then it's going to be hard. So you start with your friends and family. What are the obvious ways? Is it social media, or you recommend going to business events and evangelizing others about the product? What are some things which you see your companies on your platform being successful in building the community?
Yes, we have, and I wish, I guess being a student management, I wish there's a silver bullet, and I'm going to tell it to you, and then nobody else knows. The ones who are successful, I think, have two things. One, they have clarity of purpose. They're clear about what they're trying to say, and that story is easily told. And the second thing is they hustle. And the thing is, you don't necessarily know where that's going to come from. It may be a friend of the person you met on this trip in San Francisco. It may be at an event like this. It may be, and there's an element of this which is it's a volume game. Because you don't know, you need to work those connections. And I'd like to say there's a shortcut to some of that. Some of the shortcuts involve connecting to networks and connecting to people who have networks, because they'll understand. Once they understand you, they can point you to the right people who like what you do, who understand what you do. And it's those things which I guess there really isn't a shortcut to. But there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of people with money. And so in many ways, you only need one, right? You need everybody to like you.
Very true. That's very true. Last year, I went to this talk with Shazam, with the VP of Shazam for product, and she mentioned that Shazam knows approximately 4 to 5 days before a song becomes a hit, that this song will become a hit. And this has huge implications in terms of if you are a producer, you can just sign them up, or a recording company, and you get a good deal. We have a similar question here on Seedrs from on a slider from Nivi. And the question is there any sector arising in your brain? This is a product or service from the data on the platform.
What was the first question?
Is there any new sector arising in your Seedrs campaign?
So in terms of spotting trends, we are seeing, so let me answer that two ways. we segment all of the entrepreneurs in the campaigns. We've got about 15 different market segments. If you look at we produced a portfolio report across the entire portfolio of campaigns that we've run, so you can take a look at that. There isn't any one of those 15 which makes up more than 10% of the total. So actually there's quite a few different ones. There isn't one that's racing ahead as like this is the sector for crowdfunding. That said, some of the hotter sectors that are coming on stream are some of the ones that we're seeing generally. So artificial intelligence, health tech, some of the wearable stuff. You're seeing some of the similar trends start to appear. There's a lot of on-demand things, so beauty on demand. There's some of the social media stuff. I think there's the gamification of golf, which is on there. So some of the trends we're seeing elsewhere is now finding its way in funding. So
it's interesting. Question here from asks, what will crowdfunding platforms look like in the next 5 years? Where will we see innovation?
Okay, predicting the future. So I think there's two parts to that question. One is about what, and the other is about when. And it's interesting. There's a really interesting TED talk about the keys to success. Is it the business model? Is it the management team? Is it the time that you launch? I don't know if anybody's seen it. If you hasn't, I would recommend it. Anyway, timing is really important. So I'm going to make a prediction, but I'm going to leave out the time. So 5 years, not sure. It's probably the cusp. But I would say that where this goes is it becomes infrastructure in, I guess, the finance ecosystem. So this as an asset class becomes a normal thing that anybody can plug into, whether you are a investor on Hargreaves Lansdowne and you put all of your investments, whether it's money market stuff or investing in entrepreneurs and picking them through that stuff. So I think it actually becomes just part of, plumbed into what is an ecosystem, and then it's more about how you tell your story. It kind of comes back to norms, but in that sense, it's, I guess, the full democratization of this class. Everybody can access it, and therefore the data becomes more helpful, and there is more liquidity, so people can play, enter it and exit as they need, creating more opportunity for entrepreneurs.
So let's focus more the question on Seedrs. So Seedrs has now 200 million invested, and it's more or less, is it one country, or you are now also in Amsterdam, you starting to be also in the US? What happens when Seedrs will be a nice global scaled company? How big do you think this company can be in 3 years, for example?
That's such an unfair question.
It depends on your performance, right? Because you are the expert on scaling, so the expectations are high.
Well, I think all you're going to do is you're going to get me to you're going to give Jeff what he's going to set my goals to be.
Exactly.
So.
We write things down, we're talking to Jeff and making sure you can deliver.
Yeah, turn the video off. Look, I think if you look at peer-to-peer lending, so peer-to-peer lending is another sector which is adjacent to this. And at the moment, a lot of the peer-to-peer lending players are, billion-dollar players in terms of the amount of money that is flowing through those platforms, and there are a number of them. So in the same way that, and I would say peer-to-peer lending is probably 4 years ahead in terms of evolution, and they're still not settled. I mean, it's not a mature segment. I think they've got a long way to go before it becomes, a sustainable part of the ecosystem. But I do think that our path or our journey is equally, it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry, and like many, there isn't enough room for too many players in it.
Yeah. What needs to happen in order for this to be the case in reality? Apart from the legislation, what are the big hurdles which you need to overcome in multiple countries for that to happen?
So I think there's probably 3 dimensions to your question. He says, having been in the business for 2 months. There's one dimension which is around regulation. So the is actually quite advanced. In fact, the UK was probably the most mature in terms of regulating this industry. The US has now got regulation that allows equity crowdfunding, but they were late to the party. So actually, nice that there's a bit of a head start here. And that has to happen country by country to really allow it to become as liquid. So there's that piece, which is going to take time and is probably, you know, two years out, maybe 3 before there's some equality there. There's another piece which is about integration into existing financial infrastructure. And then there's the third, which is probably got the greatest inertia, which is education. So it's doing it, using it enough to become familiar enough with it so that it becomes normal.
What do you see in maybe 2 years is the natural rate of failed companies on the platform?
You mean companies that have funded and then not succeeded in their business? Kind of early in terms of, I guess, the life of some of the small businesses. At the moment, we're only seeing about 10 to 20% not succeed. Mm-hmm. That's quite low relative to this as an asset class. Yeah. So I think part of that is a function of where we are in the life cycle, and you know, I suppose there'll be some more norms as if you and I talk in two years' time. I think equally a lot of the folks who have launched early are the ones with a fair amount of hunger and hustle. So there's just a bit more energy in making sure it works.
Looking at the life cycle of the company, is there a natural limit until when the company can keep coming back to Seedrs, or you think that post Series B, Series C, it's not relevant to go to a platform like Seedrs?
So there's 2 parts to your question, I think. One is it's just a scale question, like from a size perspective, at some point does it become not relevant? And actually, I don't think at the moment there is there probably is. I mean, is IBM going to do any crowdfunding? Probably not. But we've seen a number of companies. Chapel Down is a winery that is public. It's on the market. Yeah. But they've done a crowdfunding campaign. And so actually a lot of the investors who came in on that campaign, they bought in at 28p, and now the stock is over £1. So they've done quite well. So I think there's a number of players who see the value in connecting with a group much closer to the crowd, part of their customer base, and I think that will only play an increasing role. Where it ends in terms of amount, I'm not sure. Yeah, but I don't see an end yet.
Okay, there's a question which is here, which sounds a little bit unfair. What's your favorite company that has been funded through Seedrs? If you choose not to answer it, feel free.
It's funny. He and I had this conversation before.
Yeah.
So I think he's the one who put that question up. There's a number. For all the reasons that if you had your business on there, I wouldn't be talking about others. I've made a number of investments, but I'm not comfortable siding with one and just communicating that.
Okay, and the next question we have there is very interesting, which is, what do you think about so-called crowdfunding campaigns of companies like the Hyperloop?
Like the what, sorry?
The Hyperloop, the Elon Musk. Yeah, there are 2 companies. One is Hyperloop One, and there is Hyperloop Technologies. And Hyperloop Technologies is basically funding itself out globally. Think about that.
I think it's, in some ways, it's what you expect from some of these businesses who are actually better understood by passion groups in the general market rather than necessarily a classical investor. I mean, there will be people who are prepared to make big bets in the VC community, whether you're in Silicon Valley or elsewhere. But you know, in terms of trying to educate the market on a new trend actually there's nothing better than actually getting your funding from the same place that you can use for marketing. So it seems to make complete sense with the kind of people who play in crowdfunding, because the kind of people who play in crowdfunding are going to be the pioneers, whether you're the entrepreneur end or whether you're the investor end.
Yeah.
And it's the pioneers that will connect much better with a Hyperloop.
Before we go and ask some more questions from the audience, I would like to know, there's this hot topic now with COOs. So we all know about the problems at Uber. You probably heard about it. And Travis Kalanick, the CEO, he just committed to finding a COO. So unfortunately, Jeff is already taken. You came to Seedrs in January, so he can't find you. Why do you think is it so important for a company which scales fast to have somebody like COO?
So having, I guess, done this a couple of times now, one of the most important things as an entrepreneur is to have a balanced team. And as I said at the start, every entrepreneur generally in this room will have certain strengths. It might be simple, but once you get past that start, you need a balanced team to kind of take you there. And it's filling in those gaps. And it's balanced in terms of skill, and it's balanced in terms of challenge, and having that diversity. So from a COO perspective, for a lot of founders, the reason why they've gotten to where they've taken the business is really because of the vision, because of the passion, because of the ability to marry that the dream piece with people's belief in that. And a COO very often will come in and actually help turn that into commercial reality. So what does it mean to go from 10 customers to 100 to 1,000 to 100,000? And some of that is just process and execution and alignment, and that's a different skill set.
In your experience, it's very important for companies to be getting advice apart from funding. These are the two most requested things which early stage companies need. They need advice, they need funding. Do you think the companies on Seedrs platform have enough advice? How do you facilitate them in this aspect?
That's a great question. I think there's probably more that we can do in that area, because I think there's, increasingly we're starting to see patterns in terms of success.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think there's more that we can do in terms of leveraging our investor base. There's more that we can do in terms of leveraging the entrepreneurs themselves. The alumni club that we run of entrepreneurs, a lot of them like to go there not because they want to talk to us, because they want to talk to the other entrepreneurs in the community.
Yeah.
And those are things which I would say are really in their infancy. I think that there's a lot more maturing that will happen there, but it's one of the areas I think you're absolutely that will make a big difference.
Do you also, apart from experienced investors, which I can talk to, experienced companies which have done successful crowdfunding campaigns, a network of mentors and advisors at Seedrs?
It's interesting. So your question very much touches on mission. So as a platform, we very much are trying to be very much sort of agnostic. So our job isn't to pick the winners. Our job is not to say, well, we think you'll succeed and you won't. It's to provide a platform on which things succeed or don't, based on the ability of the entrepreneur and the investors to connect on that thing. That said, however, it is not a friction-free experience in this space, and therefore there are a number of things that we can do to make it safer, more understood, a place that you can learn without being in the place where we need to choose. So from a mission perspective, it isn't our mission to try and pick the winners. However, we do believe it's our job to create an environment where you learn and you're better prepared to have a successful outcome. And so those pieces are some of the things that we'll be launching course of 2017 and
I understand.
2019.
My question regarding the mentors and advisors is more to Seedrs being very successful with having a network of advisors, like Andy Murray, for example, is an advisor. We have Logan Green, the CEO of Lyft, the biggest competitor of Uber. And this is something which many companies try to do to basically convince top advisors to be joining the company. How did Seedrs succeed in this? What's your advice in terms of how can we, normal people with normal companies, convince top people to come and be our advisor?
So I think there's two parts to that. There's, from our perspective, the advisors who are now mentioned, and they're great. In fact, now that I've met Andy Murray, a fantastic guy who's super passionate, like insanely passionate about entrepreneurship and small business and helping in a very surprising way. But all the people who participated in our advisor group are people who connect completely with the vision and the dream. It is something that's very personal to them. And in many ways, you find one and then they find the other. People that are like them. So a lot of those advisors, some of them came directly because they saw what Seedrs were doing and they say, I want to play, I want to participate, how can I do that? And then some were brought in by the others. So from that perspective, again, network and being introduced to people who really are excited about what you do. And then there's, where I thought your question was going was possibly about us making better use of our investors. Because if you think about the volume of investors that are in my network, actually within that group, there will be very knowledgeable people who are either functionally skilled or they have specific domain experience in what you're doing, whether it's food and beverage or artificial intelligence. And it's actually greater connections. So the connections and the examples I gave you before, where an investor became the chief marketing officer of one of the businesses, these are serendipitous. And I think there's probably more that we can do to actually encourage greater linkage and participation from the investor community.
I agree. Question on Slido, how many IPOs had Seedrs helped generate so far? Were there any? Because you don't exist for so long. It's only a couple of years. Were there any IPOs from companies which outsourced on your platform?
So there's one company that's IPO'd.
Oh, there was?
Yeah, so Free Agent has IPO'd.
Nice.
So they came on board with us, raised 1.4 million, and then they IPO'd this year.
Nice, well done. Now let's take some questions from the audience in person. So please, if you have any question, raise your hand. We're going to give you the microphone. You can ask away. We take 3 or 4 questions and then we wrap it up. If there's anything we didn't ask, feel free. So,
hi Jeff, thank you for your talk. Bogdan here from a bank, so probably not the most liked person. But how do you see alternative modes of financing, such as Seedrs? Will they coexist with traditional forms of finance in the future? Will they overtake? Will they partner? Will they? I think you touched upon that when you said Hargreaves Lansdown and how investors could go that way. But what about sort of SMEs in the future and moving up the chain or the target market to larger companies? What's your view? I'm obviously worried for my job, so yeah.
Well, in some ways, I'll be honest in the sense that it's $4,000. What shape? There's a number of players that are moving forward, and what shape takes place at the end? I think if you look at other industries and other industry examples, you will get consolidation in a class like this. It's difficult to be fragmented and serve the entrepreneur well and serve the investor well. I think what you're also getting is a lot of investment platforms, not crowdfunding. Increasingly, you start in one place and then you want to serve your high net worth individual. You want to serve your sophisticated investor. So you will increasingly broaden your product set. You know, it's why, you know, whether it's RBS or Barclays or whatever wants to be your end-to-end supplier. So you know, equity crowdfunding will just become a component within that. It'll never be a liquid class, but it will be more liquid and it'll be more accessible. I think a question that I find to answer now, I might feel differently in a year's time, having digested this. But I think the question that's difficult to answer is, to what extent does it stand alone because it makes more sense to do so as an independent group, or whether it actually just becomes part of larger organizations. It doesn't feel like that's quite, if that happens, that's quite some time away. But I do see it being separate but connected.
Okay, one more question, please. Quick question, quick answer.
Okay, so just from an investor perspective, every time I look through, it seems like every person on there is raising over 100% of what they're looking for. Is that just because I'm looking at a certain time, I'm looking at certain ones, or is it because you vet very carefully who goes on there? Is there a bubble there? I guess I'm curious.
Yeah, no, great question. No, they don't all succeed, and there isn't any visual curating that happens to kind of only show you the ones that do. So, in general, there's probably 20 to 30% failure rate in terms of what we see. There is curation. So, in other words, by that what I mean is there's a lot of entrepreneurial interest that comes in, and we then go through a conversation to establish, is this going to be successful, either in terms of where are you in the journey, because a lot of entrepreneurs will come with just an idea and it's not yet has traction, and then there's a sort of commitment. So there's a certain amount that don't make it out, but the ones that make it out, no, there is a certain failure rate. That's, at that point, it's survival of the fittest.
Hi there, thank you very much. Very simple question. Who's your mentor? Who's your idol? I've got someone I look up to, and leaders create leaders, not followers. I've met someone who showed me the way. He told me, you've got two of these, one of those, use them accordingly. Do you have a person like that?
Yes. So there's a guy who if I can describe him, he's kind of a slightly younger version of Winston Churchill. So, I'd be very frustrated in building the business. And here's somebody, he was a Harvard grad, super smart, entrepreneurship. He's built several businesses successfully. And I'd be sitting in the boardroom and say, look, you've done this before. Like, stop playing games. Just tell me what I need to do. And quite often it wasn't about, here's the structure, here's the framework. It was like, sometimes it was just, you just need to do it. Right? There's the mountain, just push on ahead. And there were times, he knew when to push that button versus other buttons, but that really changed things for me.
Just want to add exactly to the person that I'm looking up to. He said, I've just climbed Kilimanjaro, had to be done, just do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hey Jeff, you alright? Just want to find out, from Seedrs' perspective, what kind of companies would you say have the right, or would you say you've got the right appetite for? I'm just trying to get where you are. Is it pre-revenue? Is it up to $1 million rev? Is it up to 10 million rev? You say you guys fit into the whole journey. Which part of the journey should they come and see you? Or it doesn't matter?
No. But if we were speaking a few years ago, it would be very much at the end. I think the thing, 12 to 18 months, things have changed dramatically. Of a greater view, the investment community generally, that this has a credible role to play in the ecosystem, and therefore we're seeing small businesses that are in the small, either tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in revenue, suddenly get backing after the crowd from some much bigger investors, because they're seeing this group of people buy into it, and then they want to play. So actually, whether you're quite small, in fact, there was a recent one, a company that makes fancy dress. And I think, with a lot of these, a lot of the folks, obviously, we see quite a lot come in, and you can't not say, oh, I think that's going to succeed. Oh, I'm not sure that will succeed. And actually, we stopped trying to guess, because whilst there's certain elements that will, this fancy dress company has done incredibly well. They're funding, they funded, they launched, they started very small. And last month they hit 100,000 in a month. So it's kind of, at this point, we're not, we're open across the board very much.
Jeff, I'd like to know, you being a chief operating officer, I just feel when I see so many entrepreneurs and startups building the companies, they are very, very much overwhelmed. It's so much work to do. And often I think that all they need to do is somebody who is extremely efficient, somebody like you, just to watch over your shoulder for a day and learn from you. What's your advice for these companies? Because I feel like the COOs are the most efficient people in the company. Is it true? Is it true? If so, what are your tips? How should we spend our day to be making sure we get the work done?
I thought I might get this question. So there's two parts to that. One is, I don't think I've seen, I haven't, and I don't think I've seen an entrepreneurial business or a startup business where there isn't a phase where the founding members or the early members aren't working crazy hours. Like work-life balance, like if you've got it, you're weird. I don't see that.
So, sure, but you can also spend a lot of time doing unimportant things, right? Which you only know in retrospect.
It's just it's incredibly hard work, and the reason, partly why it's incredibly hard work and long hours, is because you don't know which levers you're pulling are going to have the greatest impact, right? So, my first statement is, look, you can't get away from the long hours, and those who do, there's obviously the people who kind of just land it and it works. But the other piece is very much around access to that experience, so that you aren't wasting time on things which are going to be, and therefore that's why if you've got a balanced team, if you've got a group of people around you who can check you, then there will be debates. Debates are an important part of success. If you're not arguing with your co-founders, or then it's not working. If you're not leaving the room thinking you've lost that friendship at times, you're not trying hard enough. It's that tension, it's wrestling the tension between the marketer's view, the sales view, the technical view. It's finding that compromise in that tension, which usually gets you the best outcome. And sometimes people talk about meeting efficiency. Oh, this was an efficient meeting, we were sitting in the meeting too long. You know what? There are a few decisions which are really architecturally important to your future. They might be technical decisions, they might be actual how you go to market. And you just don't leave the room until it's done. Or you come back to the room the next day, and it might be painful, but it's wrestling with those tensions. And if you don't have that in the group, then find it outside. Get some help from somebody who's been there and done it. Because a lot of the stuff, somebody's seen it, somebody's done it. Even in something as simple as sales. And I say simple kind of jokingly, because I think for sales is probably, once you got the product proposition, is the most important thing to get. And it's not just about influence. Sales is a discipline. Like, it's really hard to do well. Sales is about looking for no. It's kind of weird to say you're looking for no when I'm talking about sales. If someone says yes, that's great. But they usually say maybe. You can't do anything. You need to find the no. If they're saying maybe, you need to find the no. And that whole thing, like understanding people, do you have that person on the team who's going to find the no, to turn that back into, this is what we need to do to get to the yes. That stuff, around, having the people who do that, who know that, or access to challenge you to do that is where you can not waste time dicking around with, some, 30 things that you should be only doing 5 of.
That's a very good anti-time wasting advice. Thank you for this. And on this note, please join me in thanking Jeff Kelisky from Seedrs.
Thank you very much.
Now, before we finish, 2 more minutes of your time, I would like to say big thanks to